I would love to talk about nonviolent communication chapters 11 and 12 with you, but I need to advertise. We're going to take another week off next Sunday, because I won't be here, and I can't log in. So we'll take one more week off, and then we can finish the book on All Hallows Eve on the 31st, if that sounds good. And I'm really happy to circle back after that and do some more practice. I do want to offer, before I ask your reactions, Mary was really kind to circulate this article that talks about how this is maybe this is like a really privileged way of being, and it only works interpersonally. And I thought that was an interesting piece of feedback. But this chapter was about how it works beyond interpersonally, right? These chapters were about like, how do you actually use this as mediation, even in like war zones? And it does something really interesting, I thought, by talking about force and the difference between punitivity and protection, which I thought was a helpful distinction, although some of you might have like comments and take issue with some of it. So let me just absolutely open the floor wide by asking if there's things you want to chase as a group, or ways that you're seeing this play out in sort of in your lives and relationships that are helpful for you, or even like, hey, I tried this and it didn't work. So I just would be grateful for where you are with the reading.
Okay, I'll break the silence. I didn't like these chapters. I didn't like them, so I tried to like them, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Some of the, and maybe I'm misremembering the chapter and misquoting, but and I'm looking for my notes on, because I've moved to 13.
Yeah.
But some of the role play that he did when there was a victim, that he needed to step in and be the person that maybe did the offending, because it wasn't safe to have the offender in the room. I struggled with reading some of that because I don't know, it just felt really cruel to make the victim go back through. You're making the victim empathize with the person that really did some major damage. They didn't just tell them their dress was ugly, like it was a rape situation, or, and so that one I struggled with. I think I also struggled with these chapters because I thought they were going to tell me something different, and it was going to be something I could apply in my classroom or something like that. We got, I think it's chapter 12. Mike, remind me if I'm wrong, but where we're looking at punishment. Is that chapter 12? Chapter
12 contrasts protection in force with punitive use of force.
Yeah. And so for some of that might be interesting to hear what some of the parents have to say about that situation, but I've moved past that part of my life. And so I can only reflect back on what I did or didn't do with my son. And then I think it's easy to fall into, oh, well, maybe I didn't do everything right, so let me beat myself up about that for a minute. So these two chapters were very hard for me to get through. I wanted them to give, like when you go to a conference and you think, oh, like I don't buy any of this. You still want something to come out of it because you went to this conference. So that's kind of how I felt about these two chapters. So I would love to hear what the rest of the group thought, because I need a different perspective besides mine.
So can I do something that I don't normally do? And I appreciate you naming these two things. The first question is about role playing as the perpetrator. And I see an expert on the screen. So I'm wondering if I can tap my expert and see, Darlene, like what your thoughts about that particular chapter were, if you're willing to share.
Sure. To be honest, I didn't read the role plays in detail because I would get a little critical of them, not the concept and not the direction they were going, but I kept comparing them with what I might do in that situation.
Of course.
And of course, we all have a different flavor to how we use these concepts. But I can definitely identify with using these techniques in crisis situations or in using them with victims, perpetrators and victims. I've had to do that in both situations. For instance, crisis intervention, working on scene with like the Harris County Sheriff's Office or with the homeless. Multiple times I've used these kinds of techniques with the homeless, being angry about rules, being angry with each other, and have used them to de-escalate the situation. And in those cases, the most effective is establishing that I'm there for both people, yeah, and that you're both going to be heard, and we're going to take turns, and empathizing, understanding both sides. And as they help me understand their situation or their sides, the other person is listening and is moving, maybe hopefully in that direction of being able to listen and empathize. So that those kinds of crisis situations, this has been really effective. In terms of perpetrator and victims, it's important to remember that we do not use this early on with a victim. This is only used after a tremendous amount of therapy with the victim. And it's only used when they are ready and when they want to initiate and when that interaction would be helpful for their healing. It's not always the case that the victim needs to sit with the perpetrator. In fact, a lot of the times it's not appropriate. But when that person is ready and when it would be therapeutically helpful, then I've used these techniques to facilitate a tremendous amount of work with the victim and some preparation work with the perpetrator. They have to be ready to hear. I give a qualified support to these techniques in those situations, but they're both of them are very dicey. I mean, I enter into it with trepidation, and I have to prepare myself to be able to handle the amount of tension and the amount of emotion in those situations. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Well, your reaction was what I was looking for. So I wasn't looking for an answer. I was looking for your experience.
Yeah. Okay. There you got it.
I want to offer to you that I sometimes offer to folks, look, if you want to yell at God, I will sit in the room and like play God for you so that you can do that. And I'm not going to try to solve that, but I'll just show up so you have something to direct your anger or lament to. No one's ever taken me up on that. But I do sort of think that might be some of the spirit of this, is not to force somebody. I mean, when I read it, I thought, okay, and Jen, I think it's difficult too. So, but I do think maybe a spirit is, I'm going to make room for your feelings now, knowing that they're not about me, but I'm going to hold them for you. And you can get them out and do whatever you want with them. And I think maybe that's part of that like vicarious thing that we're able to do. I do want to share with you about punitive versus protective force. It seems like it's just about parenting, but there is this follow-up book called Punish by Reward. And quite honestly, we use grades punitively. That's what grades are about. Grades are a punishment and reward. And the truth is, like, if you're gainfully employed by a university, like, you have to give them, which means you choose to do that so you can have your job. But this is what he says, like, yeah, I choose to give grades because I want to be gainfully employed. And I think in the middle of that choice, like, there's things I have to do in my job, but if I'm honest, I choose to do them so I can have my job. And the question is, how can I negotiate? How much can I bring protective force into something that otherwise would only be punitive? Because I don't think it's an either or. I do think there's probably some gradient there. And how can I, like, show protection with consequences too? This is me trying to be real affirmative. And I have to tell you, like, Jen, I struggle with Punish by Reward. I've read that book because I just don't know what to say a lot of times. And I think actually what's hard about the entire book for me is it, like, I find myself second guessing a lot of what I'd like to say to people, which I think is real positive. I do think it's positive to, like, slow down, not because our words are magic spells, and if we get it wrong, like, we've like, done this evil magic, but I do know that words shape reality. So, like being intentional seems really important, especially when there's force involved, and, like, I'm a parent who tried everything, and then I chose to spank my son because nothing else worked. And I even told him that, and it didn't work either. And of course, the message that I sent, right, was I have more power than you. And I didn't know what else to do. And I'm not saying spanking is wrong, but I do realize it's not something I regret having done it. Because the lesson I taught was I have more power than you. And this was to a 7-year-old, not to a small kid, I mean, so there was really, like, I think he was really aware of that. And I feel like the book raises that. So I'm not being critical. I don't have, like, guilt over this. I just, again, that was punitive use of force. Jen, can I track up with you and see, like, what are you thinking with those, conversation pieces? And you can say, I hate them. I think that's okay.
Well, Mike has been staying here and he did a lot of conflict resolution stuff in the past job. And he also quit reading the dialogues, Darlene, because of the same thing. Like, he was being so critical of the dialogues. And then it was very hard for me not to see it through his eyes, or like what Mike just said about looking back on what you've done. I'm trying to look for a specific example, but it's on my phone, so it looks like this. So
yeah, that's really hard.
This idea that I did it all, like, somehow I did this wrong or whatever, and trying to see it through his eyes and what the author meant when he did the dialogues. But we've talked about this in class before, where the dialogues feel kind of canned anyway. And that's true, because he's not writing it in real time. I really struggled with the particular dialogue when it was him playing the role of someone that had, like, physically abused this female.
Yeah.
And that one was really hard for me, but I'm rambling, which means I've left where you asked the question. But it's probably the least favorite part of the book when he does these dialogues, maybe because they aren't 100% real and they're told through his voice. Perhaps, I don't know. Although I like some of the dialogues in the newer chapter, the 13, where you're talking to yourself. But there's been a lot of reflection on what he's saying and what I've done and what can I apply, to the point that I'm with you on, I thought I was pretty good at what I did and I'm second guessing what I say. And so I'm trying to pull back and just focus on what I'm saying to myself. So that's where I am.
And I know that anytime we learn like, hey, there might be a more effectual way of expressing empathy, that can come with grief and it can come with shame. But I know the author, I don't know him personally, but I know he's more interested in getting rid of those things and going forward. I trust that about him. And so I have to remind myself like, oh God, this hurts so bad to think about how I've done things. And really that's just an opportunity to say, well, these are going to be growth pains. These are going to be growth pains. Because if I cast it that way, it's easier for me. I do want to offer that in chapter 11, there was some difficult parts of that mediation, but there also was this part for me about we rarely do a good job connecting around needs. We usually spend time talking about strategies. And I think he's really right about that. So I don't want to miss that part either. You know, I often spend most of my consternation and conflict around strategies.
Well, that's because you were first trained as a problem solver.
I think that's pretty fair with most folk on the screen in this community, right? I mean, whether you're an engineer or not, and it's pretty endemic in the Episcopal Church because, frankly, most of us come from educated backgrounds, and education so often implies problem solving and analysis.
Well, I just wanted to say that on the main chapter where he was talking about stepping in and mediating conflicts, I read it and I thought it was all very interesting, but as being an extremely conflict averse person, I didn't really feel it would apply to me because I would run the other way. I mean, I would try to be a support person in the background, but I would seriously struggle if I ever had to be in that position and do something. And like what Jen said, it sort of gave me an opportunity to look back and do something which I am very, very good at, which is beat myself up over what I did when my kids were little. Well, they're grown. I'm not really in that situation anymore. So I'm trying to, as you said, take some comfort from the fact that these are growing pains. Well, I've learned more. If I were in that situation now, I hope I would handle some things differently. Well, and this gives me at least things to thought, different pathways to think about instead of being stuck in the same hamster wheel, which is what I tend to do. You know, you get on this wheel and you just go and you have to struggle to get off. So if you think about it that way, it's more as an exit ramp from the hamster wheel.
Yeah. And that ramp, you know, is really hard because according to our brain chemistry, right, the neurons that fire together wire together. And the more we do that, the faster we increase the synapse, right? So like the stuff that we're used to doing travels 50,000 times faster than new ways of being. And that, by the way, that's why it's so hard to get off the wheel, because it's 50,000 times faster. And that's, you know, you add trauma to the situation, it's even faster. But I do want to say, Kathy, because I'm conflict averse too. And because I'm conflict averse, usually when I get to conflict, I handle it in like the craziest, dumbest way, because I've been like withholding, right? And so when I get into it, like the adrenaline's coming too. When I could have said, look, because I love you and I don't want to resent you, I need to make a boundary with you on this. And the way Brene Brown says that, right, is that we either pick the discomfort of setting a boundary or the resentment that will happen if we don't. And the resentment, it happens in two ways. We will resent the other person and we will resent ourselves for not standing up for ourselves. And when push comes to shove, we'll stand up for ourselves in the bridge burning way. Well, that's me anyway, right? And so like conflict is kind, clarity is kind. I don't like being direct because I don't want to like push on people, you know, like I want to leave free will and choice. But if I'm not clear, I'm setting the stage for me to be disappointed because no one can read my mind. I can't even read my own mind. So I need to be able to tell people, this is like a requirement for me, not optional. Or I need to say, I'd really like it if you would do it this way, but it is not a requirement. And it gets really hard when you deal with families. I mean, try planning a funeral with your mom. When you do funerals, and I find myself saying things like, Mom, I do this for a living, and I want you to hear this. And then I find myself saying, why did I say that? Because now I've just set the stage to have conflict or disappointment when she doesn't take my sagely advice, which she's not going to do. Oh, it's really, really tough. And thinking about the clarity of your role instead of the, like the normal parent-child role that I have, it leaves a lot of room for what he would call violence. I don't mean like hate speech, but like not living into compassion and connection. I don't want to leave a funeral planning conversation with my mom feeling disconnected from my mom. And I don't have to, if I can be really clear within myself and also clear with her about like what the big rocks are for me.
I think that's been one of the questions through this entire book, is if this is how we have been working on communicating with other people, and the other people haven't been working on, what does this look like? And how do we practice that anyway with people that don't understand that when they're angry? I can take a specific example from teaching high school. I had a kid at their home, everybody just yelled, and you knew it was going to end when something finally broke, like physically broke, a lamp or a plate or, a child's head type of situation. Like, it was very violent. And he did not understand why I was always kind to him, because he would push at me and push at me and push at me and was really ugly and called me ugly names in class. And we went to the counselor over it, those kinds of things, right? And one day he comes to me after school and he says, I don't understand you, miss. I just don't. And he just didn't get that I was still going to be nice to him regardless of his behavior. And it was because of how home looked, right? Somebody yelled louder, and it just did this, and I wasn't behaving the way that he wanted me to. So coming in to empathize with someone that's not used to having this kind of language used with them, or this type of even compassion, sometimes the students break down because it's the first time someone they feel like really has listened to them. And other times it's just really ugly. But in a personal relationship, how do you do this if the other person doesn't want to do it? Like, I can keep working on it with my students, but if you have a human that's in your life, like your mom or a family, like, my brother, that he and I are working on my mom's estate right now. And how do you continue to show empathy for them and try to work with them and not like drown yourself, right? Like, so there's this boundary that you set, but I don't know, I just feel like I'm failing there. So
yeah, I want to hold you up. I think if it's okay, Jen, and I'm not an expert, so Darlene, straighten me out after I say this if you want to, but I'm gonna go ahead and plunge ahead foolishly. Reconciliation takes two people, and no one person can bring it about. And to be honest with you, the times when I've reconciled have kind of been like magical, because often my spouse and I are rarely in the same mood at the same time. Like usually one person wants one thing more than the other person. It's been pretty rare in my marriage. We both want the same thing just as much, and we'll go along with the other person, or somebody's in at 25 and the other person's in at 50, but very rarely are we like 50-50. And I think that's one of those things about reconciliation that is really hard, is you can want at 100 and the other person can want at 0. And guess what? It's not happening. And that's where there has to be boundaries about how far am I going to go in chasing reconciliation, because I'm not going to lose myself over that, even if it's something that I want, because then we're both lost. Right. So I think the other thing that you're addressing that I think becomes really important when we turn to chapter 13 is really like, what does it look like talking to ourselves? It would be nice if people would use nonviolent communication with us if we use it with them, but we can't control that. And the reason we choose to use it with other people is because it's life-giving for us. If it's not life-giving for you, don't do it. But I trust it will be. And I'll also say, if you can't do it internally, you can't do it with anybody else. I mean, you can't give what you don't have. And usually my harshest critic is myself, which means I've got a lot of like internal violence going on. I do think empathy is really helpful. And look, I don't, this is going to sound weird, but we're in a small group, but I can say this, I think, a lot of times what empathy looks like is projection. These are empathy misses. And I'm just going to share one with you. And I don't really know the answer, right? I mean, people have been really kind. I made a public post about my father dying yesterday, and many, many people have posted, which is lovely. And I understand they're trying to come alongside me. And if I'm honest, I'm sorry for your loss is not connect with me because I didn't lose anything. And I understand the intention of that statement, so I can hold that empathetically. Or people telling me things like, it's so hard not to have your dad. It was hard being verbally abused most of my life. That's what was hard. It was hard, losing most of the joy of my life from this man. I've moved past that. Like, I've accepted that's who I am and that there's growth in front of me. And I don't hate my dad. Like, I got to a place of forgiveness, but like people mapping their grief onto me, it's not violent in the classic sense, but it is violent because now I have to take care of them. I don't know if you realize this. It's really difficult in the middle of a loss that you're having to take care of other people who think they're taking care of you. And I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong. What I mean is, like, I'm living this right now. And at the end of the day, what do I want people to say to me? I don't even know, because I'm taking care of my mom. Look, I've even told my mom, probably pretty violently, I'm going to go to that funeral for you because I don't need that funeral. I actually don't want it, but I'm going to go to it for you. I probably shouldn't have told her that. And this is where I'm trying to figure out, how do I communicate and touch life? And I so often, confuse life and strategy. And this is the only reason I'm mentioning this, which is a little bit vulnerable, quite honestly, is because we don't know what to say. We don't know what to say. So we choose this narrative that's accepted culturally. I'm sorry for your loss. Right? I have a friend who died recently. Her father died suddenly, and they were tight. And I reached out to her. She didn't go to church anywhere. And, so can I support you anyway, or your family? And she said, hey, it means a lot that you've said that, right? And I'll let you know. And of course, she was one of the first people who messaged me after I made this post. And the reason I made this post is because I felt like that's important for people to know. But in some ways, I regret it because I'm not sure I wanted people to know. She reached out and said, like, I'm so terribly sorry. And she was reaching out from her grief, not mine. And I know that. And I can make space for that because she lost somebody she was very, very close to. Not somebody she lived in proximity with, but somebody that she was close to. And that's different. That's different from me, right? And she lost him with a big surprise. I had no surprise, right? This was years of dementia descent. And I'm going to be honest, I'm even listening to myself and like, wow, you are cold. You're like you should be like tearing up and you should be doing that because this is what we do, right? And this is why it's really, really difficult, because I've even got like this internal script for how I'm supposed to grieve, right? And I can like, I like have constant conversation with that. It was like really hard because it's not, I don't even get to say, what do I want? I've always got in the background, what am I supposed to be doing? And what are other people expecting me to do? Right. And like, you know, it's really hard to tell. I don't know. I just, again, like, I've said things to my mom and I backed down, like, please do not have an open casket. Please, please don't. And then this is what you need. So I just won't approach the casket if you do it, but do what you need. Please do not have two preachers at this service. Please do not have two sermons. But if that's what you need, I guess it's okay. You know, like I just, and like, how do you make space when you're in this? It's not like this is a parishioner that I don't know. This is my mother, and this is the loss of my dad, which is a really complicated as hell relationship. And so I'm not trying to get therapy from you. What I'm trying to do is like give you these dialogues I'm enmeshed in and say like, I don't even know what I want. And I've had to, you know, maybe this is part of it. Like, I'm so good at saying, I'm here for anything you need. Well, I can tell you my mother didn't need anything. She's going to die not needing anything because she's self-sufficient and perfectionist and a workaholic, just like me. And if they say, Mom, don't think about what you need, think about what you want. Well, that's even harder than needs because she's not allowed to want anything. I'm trying on, if there's anything you think you might even like, if you might like it, I'll give it a shot. And if we get it wrong, it's worth the experiment for me, but just tell me what you might like. I mean, like nuancing those language. And how do you know who to nuance with? Because I know people who will tell me what they need in a second. And strangely, because I don't need anything, I'll hear that like, boy, you're a needy person. I can't believe you need that. I'm like this is the weirdness of communication that I think he's getting at, you know, and like, again, I rarely even know what to say to somebody. I know the cultural script is, I'm sorry for your loss. And I know that means I want to come alongside you, or I want to have empathy with you. I just know also like, that's not what I would like to hear. And I can't tell you what I'd like to hear. And I think the book is inviting that consideration. And, you know, to be honest, maybe it is better to just be awkward and say to people, God, I don't even know what to tell you, but I'd love to listen to where you are if you ever want to share it. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what we do. And if a person I nominally know said that, I probably wouldn't have the conversation with them. But to be honest, maybe I would. Maybe I'd say, I know you so little, I think I could just go ahead and tell you.
But Mike, I just wanted to say something. My father had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he ended up with 3 sort of rounds of treatment, about 5 years apart each. And the third one just blew all the systems out. He came home from the hospital on Thursday and he died on Sunday, and I was there. And I had a good relationship with my dad, and it was very, very hard.
Yeah.
My mother, on the other hand, took 6 years of the dementia and the ill health and the rest of it. So when she died, we had been grieving her all along.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother, who was considered one of the most competent, the most accomplished hostesses on the campus, and who taught all the illiterate adults how to read. Whenever they had a hard case, they sent her to my mother. When I would go visit, she would get all upset because her twin sister was taken by the bears into the woods. She doesn't have a twin sister. So it's the kind of thing where you put the spin on it and say, oh, they needed someone to teach them how to dance, and she would be okay. So it was a totally different situation. Because we had done a lot of the grieving already, because she wasn't the mom we grew up with or the mom we knew. So I think it does feel very different if a situation with a dementia where it takes a long time for someone to go. And here I am. I'm sorry, I'm intruding on you again with
No, you're
my
not intruding.
experiences.
This is what a conversation looks like, is that we're sharing ourselves corporately, guided around some kind of universal thread. And of course, it's going to come out different. And I think that's part of the goal, is to say, empathy is not sympathy, it's different. My experience is not your experience. And it doesn't have to be for me to say, like, I perceive that this is like a major life event, and I'd like to come alongside you however you'd like.
Yeah, Kathy, we had a similar experience when my mother-in-law was ill and passed away, and spent about 5 months in a hospital / rehab place hooked up to a ventilator at the end. It was a long process, and at the end she demanded to be let go, and we did, but we had done the pre-grieving. It was a very different feeling than a sudden thing. And I have a cousin whose mother had Alzheimer's, and he said he dreaded the telephone, and that not being stressed about the telephone after she passed was a relief for him. So,
And this is the case, right? Like, I know this because this is what I do. When people live with somebody who's chronically ill and that person dies, they feel a lot of relief. And then they feel a lot of guilt and shame because they feel relieved. Right? And like, my script is, people say, oh, having Alzheimer's must be awful. Well, not for the person with it, because they don't even know. It's awful for anybody else. And the reason it's awful for us is because we project like what normalcy is onto those people. I mean, I can tell you, my dad was happy to have Alzheimer's. I mean, he wasn't bothered that he had Alzheimer's most of the time. In moments of clarity, he probably knew he was literally losing his mind, and that probably bothered him. But because of the disease gives you the gift that doesn't last long. He forgot he was losing his mind most of the time. We knew it. And that probably sounds really cavalier. But I don't want to project that on you. I want to say that's my experience. And
No, I don't think so, because my mother always seemed very content. Louis commented at one time, he said, I don't know why you're so, she said, look, she's content. She doesn't, none of this seems to bother her. She maybe doesn't know the difference anymore. I said, we were the ones who were so upset.
Yeah.
That it was hard to deal with that, seeing the difference between who she used to be and who she was now. So I think a lot of that, as you said, is then we projected back onto her. She must be upset. Well, she didn't appear to be upset at all. It was us.
I think one of the things that's really hard is in doing, and I'm just realizing this, please, if I've misstepped, my goal actually was to be vulnerable and not receive care from you, but just to talk about my experience. And if I've come across any other way, I'm going to apologize for that, because I'm not trying to eke anything out. And by the way, I'm really grateful for lots of people immediately rallying to a post. I'm really grateful for that, because I understand it's coming from a place of desiring to connect and show love. And I think the book does a really good job. So it talks about what the needs are. And I think that's the need in these communications. Even though the strategy may not always be like the strategy I resonated with. And that's really helpful language for me to talk about. I think need and strategy is like equivalent to talking about impact and intent, right? Like, very few people intend to be racist and homophobic and hateful, even if that is the impact of their actions. I shouldn't compare those, because nobody's trying to do that to me or other people when they die. The intent is really, I think, how can I minister to your needs of life? I really think that's where people are coming from. But I see this book is really trying to say, like, okay, let's have a conversation about that. And one of the things I don't always do really well, sometimes I'll say, I'm if you'd like to talk, I can talk, or I'll listen. But I don't usually say that in a moment when I can listen, because I'm busy, or I'm going somewhere, or I've got an appointment. and like, how do I create a container where I can actually do that? I think there's another thing, and this is what would be a strategy. How can I strategically create a container where I can empathize or just, really listen where somebody's going through? And there's times I can't, right? Like if we're after Sunday morning and there's a line of people and somebody wants to tell me like a 10-minute story, that's just not the time, right? This is not the time. So then how do I create a time after that that's going to work, right? Or if I'm on the move and like the barista is sad and they say, what's going on? And they say something, they're working, I'm leaving. So then is there a way I can create a circle back? I know this is a little bit like off topic, but I think it's on topic. I hope that's okay to say.
Has anyone tried to practice what he actually does in the book? Because I do this in my head, but I don't typically do it out loud, where he guesses what the needs are of the other person and he says them out loud to them. Do you need this, or are you feeling this? And it usually gives that person an opportunity to say, yes, that is exactly what I'm thinking, or no, absolutely not. And I guess because you are forcing that other person to finally think about, oh, there's a need here that's not being met.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really identify it, but it's definitely not what you just said. Maybe it's more like this. And I like that. But are you guys practicing that at all? Because the how can I help is too open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like when I waited tables in college, they trained us to go to the table and you don't ask, can I get you started with anything? You give them two choices up front because they're going to pick one. It's a sales tactic, but they're going to pick one because they didn't have to think. There were two options in front of them. But is anybody doing have you tried this, where you guess what the other one is thinking or feeling?
Lila says she's practicing guessing what needs are and she's never right. So that starts the conversation.
And you say them out loud, Lila? Like you actually ask the person, are you feeling this? Are you feeling that?
She says, yeah. Jen, since I've read this book, I'm mindful when I'm not in a rush to try this more because that's new to me. Usually what I'm used to doing, which drives me crazy when people do it to me, is somebody will say like, I'm having a really hard time, like with my parents' divorce. What I hear you saying is that you're having a hard time with your parents' divorce. And of course, like that's offensive. I just, like that to me can be tough. There's times when that works out, like person doesn't think I'm actually listening where I can offer that. But, trying to say when somebody's like, I'm so mad about this, to say like, I'm sensing a need, right, for connection that's not being met. No, that's not it at all. Well, would you tell me what, I mean, like I feel like I've done it a couple of times since reading. And a lot of times, if I'm honest, I get so wound up in my myelinated brain that I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be defensive right now. Instead of curious. Like that thing that is bothering you is more about you than it is about me. So tell me more about you. That's, like what's funny is I know the medicine I should be taking. And I often say, I am not taking medicine. So yes and no for me. Lila, please.
Yeah, hi there. I just wanted to add that I have been doing this and I never guess right, but it starts a conversation every time, and sometimes it's short and sometimes it's weird. It's often awkward, but it's always gratifying to me that I've struck out and tried this. And another strange benefit I've had is it's really diffused my temper and made me feel less frustration, which generally leads to anger with me. I mean, it's striking how diffused I've been, and I think it's somehow tied up with this, and it's delightful because I like feeling pleasant with myself. Yeah, but boy, I really suck at guessing what people are feeling and thinking. Like I just said, Jim, I think you've been suffering. And he said, oh no, I'm fine. Okay, good to know. So it's been very good. And it feels less awkward every time I do it. And people often like sharing what they're feeling. And the other thing I've learned is nobody really cares what I think, which is fine. That's all I know.
Well, I don't think that's it. Can I chase you on one thing? You said you're feeling like you're mapping less to anger when you
Yes.
do this. And do you have any insight into like how that's working or why that's the case?
I don't, but
Okay.
maybe I will next week. I mean, I think it's really sinking in to be differently when I approach another person and approach a relationship. And if I'm listening, I'm not trying to meet any of my needs. So I'm just
Mhm.
being present, and it feels really pleasant, and I like feeling good. I mean, I like feeling good.
Hmm. Well,
It's like window.
can I push you on that a little bit? When you're
Sure.
listening, you're not trying to meet any of your needs, but
Mm.
don't you have a need for connection?
Don't I have any what? Sorry.
Don't you have a need for connection with other people?
Sure. Yeah. So I am meeting that. Yes.
I mean, I wonder if framing it that way might help some of us who are on the fence. Like, I'm going to choose to listen so I can make my need for connection.
Very right, Mike. Thank you for putting that into words. Thank you.
I have to tell myself that stuff sometimes, or I just don't do it.
Yeah. It's been gratifying and satisfying to. Mhm. Yeah, and I just have to be willing to look silly, which is, I'm pretty practiced at that. No problem.
Is anybody else trying this? Like trying this bit about need identification and listening? Just out of curiosity.
I'll think about it, but I haven't actually practiced it yet. Sorry, Jen. So I guess that's baby steps. Baby steps. You start thinking about it in your head afterwards, and then how could I apply this next time?
I'm still working on identifying feelings.
Mhm.
Man. Thank you for that.
It was definitely on my mind more in the early chapters. And then I kind of stepped away from the book for a few weeks and reading other things. And now I'm trying to get back to it. And so trying to bring it more to the forefront of, and again, stepping back, listening for needs and hearing other people say something. So that's my new for this week. What is the need behind what someone is saying? And then I guess trying to take the next step, as Jim said, ask or guess to help keep that conversation going or to start that conversation I'm going to try to do this week.
Yeah.
To circle back to I'm still trying to figure out the feeling side of it. For now, I've almost given up on that. Like, what am I actually feeling? And I've just moved to what need is not being met here. Like, I might not be able to put a finger on the feeling, but I am 100% sure that there's a need that's not being met, or a value or boundary that's being broken,
Yeah.
and trying to look at that side of it for me, like inwardly. But I can relate to the feeling part is very hard. And then allowing myself to have needs has been very hard. I was raised in a very traditional German Lutheran household, and you weren't supposed to have needs. You were supposed to make sure everyone else's needs were met. So I think I thought I was pretty good at guessing at what other people's needs are, which is why I asked the group if you've been using it, because I do often guess incorrectly. And that's because I'm not that person, and so I'm projecting probably my needs into their space. So, but I do like the thought that it's our need for connection, right? And that's why it feels good to reach out and try to understand better. So, and I've got to drive, but thanks for sharing and being vulnerable this morning. And I'll see some of you at 10:30.
Thanks, Jen. Really appreciate your questions and your contribution as always. Well, let me ask if there's anything else for the good of the cause, actually. Antha, you're on mic, so maybe.
No, actually, honestly, Mike, I'm behind in this book, and I joined today just because I missed seeing y'all and wanted to be with you. So
Thank you.
Happy to hear everyone else's thoughts.
But I think that the book is just really a stimulus to help do the connection, and like you're participating in the connection. And what I appreciate you saying is, again, like, I know all of this stuff because I've been trained over and over again, but you ask me how I'm feeling good or sad or like mad, maybe 3 other feelings. And man, that's crappy because I have a much bigger vocabulary than that, but it doesn't connect with my like EQ. And it takes so much, a lot of people don't, having worked with drug addicts, they have to take each day, like one day at a time, because it's overwhelming to think about that amount of work for the rest of their lives. And if I'm really honest, I used to think, well, that's because they're lazy or whatever. I get it. This is so much damn work to be good to myself. It's so much work because I've not practiced it. It's so much work to show empathy for people because I'm like, the work I've done has been like less than, it's been like sympathy kind of stuff, And so like, this is really hard. It's like what I'm doing is like kind of working, even though it disappoints me most of the time, but it's like something, So like, I think that's why this is like just so hard. It's because it takes a lot to reestablish a status quo.
Well, I actually printed out the list you sent of the different words. And I said before that my vocabulary for negative emotions is much stronger than my vocabulary for positive ones. And so my husband and I will talk about stuff at meals together, and we'll actually pull that list out. It's like, okay, so how was I feeling about that? And we'll kind of go down the list, because gratified is different than cheerful, is different than engaged. And so I've actually been using that list you sent to try to help me on that.
I may have mentioned to you that the person who gave me that list has made like a fan deck of cards that they go through, like they're trying to learn new vocabulary, because that is what it is. It's like new vocabulary that we're trying to get into like our schema, because it's because we're not there. I should make a fan deck probably. I'm not really quite sure what a fan deck is, but I think I should make one.
I'd like to make one, Mike, because I found that attachment you sent very helpful, just like Anthony's saying.
Yeah. I will tell you, and I know it's not like the promised land, but it's probably going to be helpful. I think on November 30th is Brene Brown's newest book, which is like an atlas of feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And like, because we use these words very imprecisely, and like, again, I'm not trying to say it's a spell and you got to get it right, but I think the book is like relatively long and it identifies 59 feelings and like kind of what the data indicates they really mean, so that we can be more proficient with our vocabulary. Yeah. Okay, so look, we're gonna take next week off. Thanks for being really kind listeners, as always. I mean, it touches my heart that you listen to me when I don't even know what I'm saying. So thank you for that, and for being kind and thoughtful with one another. We'll do chapters 13 and 14 on Halloween on the 31st, and I'll see you soon enough. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye, Antha. Thanks, Mike.